The sound of cattle lowing in distress had yanked Yates Patterson from his morning coffee. But nothing could have prepared him for the sight that greeted him when he crested the hill overlooking his northern pasture on that sweltering August morning in 1878. A woman stood among his 200 head of restless longhorns, her back straight as a lodgepole pine, holding what appeared to be a leather-bound book. Her voice carried across the Texas grassland with a clarity that seemed to cut through the heavy air itself. She was reading aloud, and as the words flowed from her lips, Yates watched in absolute amazement as his cattle, which had been stamping and bellowing just moments before, began to settle. Their massive heads lowered, their agitated movements ceased, and within minutes, they stood peacefully grazing as though they had never been disturbed at all. Yates urged his horse forward slowly, not wanting to break whatever spell this stranger had cast over his herd. As he drew closer, he could make out her features more clearly. She wore a simple calico dress that had seen better days, the hem dusty from travel. Dark hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and though her face was turned toward the book, he could see the determined set of her jaw. The summer wind swept across the meadow, carrying with it the promise of cooler days ahead, she read, her voice melodious and sure. The old oak tree stood sentinel, as it had for 100 years before, watching the seasons change with patient wisdom. Yates dismounted about 20 feet away, leading his horse by the reins. He cleared his throat and the woman's head snapped up. Her eyes were the color of honey in sunlight, and they widened with alarm when she saw him. "I did not mean to trespass," she said quickly, closing the book and holding it against her chest like a shield. "Your cattle were in distress. I heard them from the road and I thought perhaps I could help. Help by reading to them." Yates kept his voice gentle, though confusion colored every word. He was a tall man, weathered by 32 years of Texas sun and wind, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that had seen too many lonely seasons. His ranch, the Double P, sprawled across 5,000 acres just outside Brownsville in the southern tip of Texas, but for all its size, it felt empty most days. The woman lifted her chin, and he caught a flash of defiance in those remarkable eyes. Animals respond to calm voices. "My father was a veterinarian back in Missouri. He taught me that an agitated animal needs soothing, and what better way to soothe than with words." "Your father taught you well," Yates admitted, glancing at his herd. They were indeed calmer than he had seen them in weeks. The drought had made them irritable, and the oppressive heat shortened everyone's temper, human and animal alike. "What were they so worked up about?" "A rattlesnake," the woman said, pointing toward a rocky outcropping. "A large one. I managed to get it to move along before anyone got hurt, but the cattle were already panicked." Yates felt his eyebrows rise. "You moved a rattler with a long stick and patience," she replied. "I am not foolish enough to approach one directly." He studied her more carefully. She was young, probably in her mid-20s, with a face that might have been called pretty if it had not been so thin. She looked hungry, he realized, and tired in a way that spoke of long travels and little rest. The dress she wore was clean but patched in several places, and her shoes were worn through at the heels. "I am Yates Patterson," he said, extending his hand. "This is my ranch." She hesitated before reaching out to shake his hand. Her grip was firm despite her obvious exhaustion. "Willa Morrison." "I apologize again for the intrusion, Mr. Patterson. I will be on my way now." "Where exactly are you headed, Miss Morrison?" He could see no horse, no wagon, nothing to suggest how she had arrived here. "Into Brownsville," she said. "I am seeking employment. Did you walk from the main road?" That was nearly 3 miles across rough country. Her silence was answer enough. Yates frowned, studying the merciless sun beating down on them. It had to be close to 95 degrees already, and it was not yet noon. "You will have heat stroke before you make it another mile," he said bluntly. "Come up to the house, get some water and food, and then I will take you into town in the wagon." "I cannot accept charity," Willa said stiffly. "It is not charity. You helped my cattle. Consider it payment." When she still looked uncertain, he added, "Please. My mother would rise from her grave to haunt me if I let a woman walk this heat without offering help." That earned him a small smile, the first he had seen cross her face. It transformed her entirely, softening the hard edges that hunger and hardship had carved into her features. "Very well," she agreed. "Thank you, Mr. Patterson." They walked together toward the main house, a solid 2-story structure built of local limestone that stayed relatively cool even in the worst heat. Yates found himself glancing sideways at Willa, curious about this strange woman who read to cattle and moved rattlesnakes with sticks. "What book were you reading?" he asked. She held it up so he could see the worn cover. "A collection of essays by Emerson. It belonged to my father. It is one of the few things I have left of his. He passed 3 months ago. Yellow fever took him and my mother both within a week of each other." Her voice remained steady, but Yates heard the grief beneath the words. "I had been living with an aunt in St. Louis, but she made it clear I had worn out my welcome. So I came south, hoping to find work as a teacher or a governess." They reached the house, and Yates led her through the heavy oak door into the blessed coolness of the front hall. His housekeeper, Rosa, appeared from the kitchen, her eyes widening at the sight of a strange woman. "Rosa, this is Miss Willa Morrison. She needs food and water. Would you mind fixing something?" Rosa, a stout Mexican woman who had worked for the Patterson family for 20 years, took one look at Willa's thin frame and immediately hustled her toward the kitchen, scolding in rapid Spanish about foolish girls walking in the heat. Yates watched them go, then walked to his study and poured himself a whiskey despite the early hour. His hands were shaking slightly, and he needed a moment to process what had just happened. For 5 years, since his father had died and left him the ranch, he had lived a solitary existence. He had his ranch hands, he had Rosa, but he had no real companionship. At 32, he should have been married with children, but the few women in Brownsville had no interest in a quiet rancher who spent more time with cattle than people. And now a strange woman had appeared on his land, reading to his livestock, and something about her had struck him like a lightning bolt. The way she held herself, the intelligence in her eyes, the courage it took to approach a herd of agitated cattle or move a rattlesnake. She was remarkable, and he had known her all of 20 minutes. He downed the whiskey and went to join her in the kitchen. Willa sat at the large wooden table, already working her way through a plate of eggs, beans, and fresh tortillas. Rosa stood nearby with her arms crossed, nodding in approval as the girl ate. Yates noticed Willa was trying to eat slowly with dignity, but her hunger kept winning out. "When did you last have a proper meal?" he asked, pulling out a chair across from her. She swallowed before answering. 2 days ago. I had enough money for one night in a boarding house in Corpus Christi, and they provided dinner. Since then, I have been walking." "You walked from Corpus Christi?" "That was over 150 miles. I caught a few rides in wagons," she admitted. "But mostly, yes, I walked." Yates exchanged a glance with Rosa, who shook her head in dismay. No wonder the girl looked half dead on her feet. "What kind of employment are you hoping to find in Brownsville?" he asked. "Anything respectable," Willa said. "I can read and write in both English and French. I can do figures. I have some experience teaching younger children. I can also keep house, mend clothes, and cook adequately if not expertly." She paused, taking a sip of water. "I am a hard worker, Mr. Patterson. I simply need someone willing to give me a chance." An idea was forming in Yates's mind, but he needed to think it through carefully. He did not want to frighten her or make her think he had dishonorable intentions. "My cattle have been restless for weeks," he said slowly. "The drought has them on edge, and we have been having trouble with them at feeding time and during moves. If you could do with them what you did today, that would be worth something." Willa set down her fork and looked at him directly. "You want to hire me to read to your cattle?" "I want to hire you to help keep them calm. Reading seems to work. The boys and I have tried everything else." It was true enough. His 5 ranch hands had been at their wits' end trying to manage the increasingly agitated herd. "I have never heard of such a job," she said, but he could see interest kindling in her eyes. "You said your father was a veterinarian. You clearly know animals and you need employment. I need help with my livestock." He leaned forward. "I can offer you room and board here at the house. Rosa could use help with the cooking and cleaning anyway, and I will pay you $30 a month." It was a generous wage, more than most women could make as teachers or governesses, and he saw the exact moment she realized that. Her eyes widened and she opened her mouth, then closed it again. "I would have my own room?" she asked carefully. "Yes. Upstairs with a lock on the door. Rosa lives here too, and everything would be proper and above board." He met her gaze steadily. "I am not offering anything inappropriate, Miss Morrison. I am simply a rancher with a problem, and you seem to be the solution." She studied him for a long moment, and Yates forced himself to sit still under her scrutiny. He was not a handsome man, he knew. His face was too weathered, his features too rough, but he hoped she could see that he was honest. "All right," Willa said finally. "I accept your offer, Mr. Patterson. When would you like me to start? Tomorrow? Today you rest. Rosa will show you to your room and you can get cleaned up and sleep. You look like you could use a week of sleep, frankly." "I will not disappoint you," Willa promised, and the determination in her voice made him believe her. That evening, after Willa had been shown to her room and had presumably collapsed into bed, Yates sat on his front porch and watched the sun set over his land. The sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink, and the heat finally began to ease. His ranch hands had come back from their day's work, and he had explained the new situation to them. They had been skeptical but willing to give anything a try if it meant calmer cattle. His foreman, Miguel, had pulled him aside. "You sure about this, boss? Strange woman shows up out of nowhere, and you are hiring her just like that? She helped those cattle when they were worked up over that snake. You and the boys have been complaining about how hard they have been to handle." "If she can help, why not?" Miguel had nodded slowly. "Just be careful. You have been alone a long time. Easy to get ideas about a pretty girl." Yates could not deny that Willa was pretty, even half-starved and exhausted. But that was not why he had hired her. At least he did not think it was. He genuinely believed she could help with the cattle. And if she also brought some life and light back to this empty house, well, that was just a fortunate side effect. He heard the door open behind him and turned to find Rosa joining him on the porch. She settled into the other rocking chair with a tired sigh. "The girl is sleeping," she reported. "Poor thing was asleep before her head hit the pillow. She is too thin, Yates. She has been through something hard. I know. That is why I want to help her. You are a good man like your father." Rosa rocked slowly. "But Miguel is right to warn you. That girl is going to wake up tomorrow looking better after a full belly and a good sleep, and you are going to notice. You are human. Just remember to be honorable." "I will, Rosa. I promise." She patted his hand and went back inside, leaving Yates alone with his thoughts and the deepening twilight. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and his cattle lowed in response. He thought about Willa's voice, how it had soothed them, and found himself looking forward to tomorrow in a way he had not looked forward to anything in a very long time. The next morning dawned hot and bright, as every morning seemed to in this endless summer. Yates was up before the sun, as always, and was drinking coffee on the porch when Willa emerged from the house. She looked transformed. Her hair was clean and braided, her dress was still worn but freshly washed, and most importantly, the exhaustion had faded from her face. She looked young and vibrant, and Yates felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. "Good morning, Mr. Patterson," she said, her voice still carrying that melodious quality he remembered. "I am ready to work." "Good morning, Miss Morrison. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," she admitted. "Your housekeeper, Rosa, is an angel. She brought me up clean clothes last night. They belonged to your mother." "Yes, Rosa kept them. She always hoped I would marry someday and my wife could use them. But that has not happened, so you might as well benefit from them." Willa smoothed down the skirt of the simple blue cotton dress. It fit her reasonably well, though his mother had been a larger woman. "Please tell her thank you again for me. I am grateful. You can tell her yourself at breakfast. But first, let me show you the cattle and explain what I need." They walked together toward the northern pasture, where the herd was already stirring with the sunrise. Yates explained the routine of the ranch, how they moved the cattle between pastures, how they supplemented their feed during the drought, and the various problems they had been having with the animals' temperaments. "They have always been somewhat ornery," he said. "Longhorns can be contrary beasts at the best of times, but lately they have been downright dangerous. We have had 2 horses injured, and one of my hands nearly got trampled last week." Willa frowned, studying the cattle thoughtfully. "Have you had a veterinarian look at them?" "To make sure there is not an underlying illness causing their irritability. The closest vet is in Corpus Christi, and he is not inclined to travel this far for cattle. He says they are just mean by nature." "Some are," Willa agreed, "but animals usually have reasons for their behavior. Your drought has them stressed, certainly. Less water, less food, and this oppressive heat would make anyone irritable, but there might be more to it." She approached the fence, and Yates tensed, ready to pull her back if the cattle charged. But instead, she began to speak to them in that same soothing voice she had used yesterday. Not reading this time, just talking, low and gentle. "Good morning, you beautiful creatures. What a fine herd you are. Look at those magnificent horns. You are survivors, are you not? Strong and stubborn and proud. I respect that about you. I am a bit stubborn myself." To Yates's astonishment, several of the nearest cattle raised their heads and ambled toward the fence. Not aggressively, but with what almost looked like curiosity. One large bull, usually the most aggressive of the lot, came right up to where Willa stood and allowed her to reach over and scratch between his horns. "That bull, that is Diablo," Yates said quietly. "He has horned 2 horses and a fence post in the last month alone. Nobody gets near him." "Hello, Diablo," Willa murmured. "What a fierce name for a fellow who just wants a little kindness, hum? You are not a devil at all. You are just hot and tired and thirsty like everyone else." Diablo closed his eyes and leaned into her touch, and Yates shook his head in disbelief. Whatever gift this woman had, it was real and undeniable. "What do you think?" he asked. "Can you work with them?" "Yes," Willa said confidently. "I will spend time with them every day, talk to them, read to them, let them get used to my presence and my voice. Animals need consistency and calm. If I can provide that, they should settle. Then you have a job, Miss Morrison, for as long as you want it." She turned to smile at him, and Yates felt that complicated thing happen in his chest again. He was in trouble, he realized, deep trouble, because Rosa had been right. Willa Morrison was not just pretty. She was remarkable, and he was dangerously close to becoming infatuated with her. Over the following weeks, Yates watched as Willa worked magic with his cattle. Every morning after breakfast, she would walk out to whichever pasture they occupied and spend 2 to 3 hours just being among them. Sometimes she read from her book of Emerson essays. Sometimes she read from the Bible or from newspapers that were weeks out of date. Sometimes she simply talked, telling them stories about her childhood in Missouri, her parents, the journey that had brought her to Texas. The cattle responded to her in ways they had never responded to anyone. They followed her around the pasture like oversized dogs. They came when she called. And most importantly, their aggressive behavior diminished dramatically. Feeding times became peaceful. Moving them between pastures became easy. Even Diablo, the notorious bull, became docile under Willa's gentle handling. Yates's ranch hands were amazed and grateful. Miguel told Willa she was worth her weight in gold. The men started calling her the cattle whisperer, though never mockingly. They all saw the genuine results of her work, but it was not just the cattle that were changing. The entire ranch seemed more peaceful, more alive. Willa helped Rosa in the kitchen and filled the house with conversation and laughter. She mended clothes for the ranch hands and never complained about any task, no matter how menial. She was unfailingly cheerful, hardworking, and kind, and Yates found himself falling for her a little more each day. He tried to maintain a proper distance. She was his employee, after all, and younger than him by several years. He had no right to harbor romantic feelings for her, but it was impossible not to notice everything about her. The way she sang softly to herself while doing chores. The way she laughed at Rosa's stories. The way she pushed her hair back from her face when she was concentrating. The intelligence that sparkled in her eyes whenever they discussed books or current events. One evening, about a month after Willa's arrival, Yates found her sitting on the front porch after dinner, watching the sunset. He hesitated, then joined her, settling into the rocking chair beside hers. "Beautiful evening," he remarked. "It is," she agreed. "I never tire of these Texas sunsets. The sky seems so much bigger here than it did in Missouri." "Everything is bigger in Texas, or so they say." He rocked slowly, comfortable in the silence. After a moment he asked, "Are you happy here, Willa? Is this arrangement working out for you?" She turned to look at him, surprise evident on her face. "Happy, Mr. Patterson, I am more than happy. I am grateful every single day for your kindness in taking me in. You saved my life, I think. I was at the end of my resources when you found me." "You saved yourself," Yates corrected. "You walked all that way, you kept going when many would have given up. You have courage, Willa Morrison." She blushed, and he found even that charming. "I simply did what I had to do. As for this arrangement, it is working out wonderfully, better than I could have hoped. Rosa treats me like a daughter. The work with the cattle is fascinating, and you have been nothing but respectful and kind. I consider myself very fortunate." "I am the fortunate one," Yates said before he could stop himself. "You have brought peace to more than just the cattle. This house was lonely before you came. Now it feels like a home again." There was a long pause. Willa's blush deepened, and she looked away, but not before he saw something warm and pleased in her expression. "That is kind of you to say," she murmured. They sat in silence for a while longer, watching the sun sink below the horizon. Yates felt the weight of unspoken words between them, but he did not know how to voice what he was feeling. It seemed too soon, too presumptuous. So he said nothing, and eventually Willa excused herself and went inside. But that night, lying in his bed, Yates admitted the truth to himself. He was not falling for Willa Morrison. He had already fallen. He was in love with her, thoroughly and completely. The question now was what to do about it. The next morning, Miguel rode in with news that sent a chill down Yates's spine. Cattle rustlers had been spotted in the area. Several ranches to the north had lost livestock, and there was word that the gang was moving south toward Brownsville. Yates immediately called a meeting with all his ranch hands. They gathered in the barn and he laid out the situation. "We need to be vigilant," he said. "Double the watch on the herd, especially at night. Keep your rifles handy. If you see anything suspicious, fire a shot to alert the others." "What about Miss Morrison?" Miguel asked. "Should she still be going out to the herd alone?" Yates frowned. He had not considered that. The thought of Willa being in danger made his blood run cold. "No," he decided. "One of you will accompany her from now on, just to be safe." When he explained the situation to Willa, she looked concerned but not frightened. "I understand," she said. "I do not want to make things more difficult, though. If my presence with the cattle puts anyone at risk, I can stop for a while." "No," Yates said firmly. "The cattle need you, and you are not doing anything wrong. We will just take precautions until this threat passes." For the next week, one of the ranch hands accompanied Willa to the pasture each day. Usually, it was Miguel or young Tommy, the youngest hand at 20 years old. They kept watch while she worked with the cattle, and nothing unusual occurred. But on the 8th day, everything changed. Yates was working in the barn when he heard the gunshot. His blood turned to ice, and he grabbed his rifle and sprinted toward the northern pasture. 2 more shots rang out, and his heart hammered against his ribs. Willa was out there. If anything happened to her, if those rustlers hurt her. He crested the hill and took in the scene below. 4 rough-looking men on horseback were attempting to drive off a section of his herd. Miguel was pinned behind a rock outcropping, exchanging fire with 2 of them. And Willa was standing in the middle of the chaos, her arms spread wide, putting herself between the rustlers and the cattle. "Stop," she was shouting. "Stop this right now." One of the rustlers turned his horse toward her, and Yates's world narrowed to a single point of terrified focus. He raised his rifle, aimed, and fired. The shot kicked up dirt right in front of the rustler's horse, causing it to rear. The man fought for control, and Yates chambered another round. "That was a warning," he bellowed, his voice carrying across the pasture. "The next one will not be. Get off my land." The rustlers looked up and saw Yates on the hill with his rifle trained on them. They saw Miguel still firing from cover. And they must have decided that a few head of cattle were not worth dying for, because they turned their horses and rode off at a gallop, disappearing into the scrub brush. Yates ran down the hill, his only thought to reach Willa. She was still standing in the same spot, though she was shaking now, the adrenaline clearly wearing off. He reached her and without thinking grabbed her by the shoulders. "Are you out of your mind?" he demanded, fear making his voice harsh. "You could have been killed. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking that those are your cattle," Willa shot back, her own voice shaking. "Your livelihood. I could not just let them be stolen." "They are just cattle. They can be replaced. You cannot." The words burst out of him before he could stop them, raw and revealing. Willa stared up at him, her eyes wide. Miguel had joined them now, holstering his gun, and he looked between them with knowing eyes. "Everyone is fine," the foreman said diplomatically. "No one hurt. Cattle are all here. I will round up the boys and we will keep extra watch tonight. You two should head back to the house." Yates realized he was still gripping Willa's shoulders. He forced himself to let go and took a step back. "Yes, good, thank you, Miguel." The walk back to the house was silent and tense. Yates's emotions were in turmoil. The terror he had felt when he thought Willa might be hurt had stripped away all his careful control. He could not pretend anymore that she was just an employee, just a woman he had hired to help with the cattle. When they reached the house, Willa turned to face him on the porch. Her color was high and her hands were still trembling slightly, but her voice was steady. "I need to know something," she said. "What you said out there about me not being replaceable. Did you mean that? Yates looked at her, at this brave, foolish, remarkable woman, and knew he could not lie. Yes, I meant it. Why? Because somewhere in the last 6 weeks I fell in love with you, he said simply. I did not mean to, I tried not to, but I did anyway. Willa drew in a sharp breath. For a long moment she said nothing, and Yates felt his heart sinking. He had overstepped. He had made her uncomfortable. He had ruined everything. I fell in love with you too, she whispered. Yates was certain he had misheard. What? I love you, Yates. She said his given name for the first time, and it sounded like music. I have been trying to tell myself it was just gratitude, or the security you have given me, or simply my imagination. But it is not. It is love. I love you. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides and took her face in his hands. May I kiss you? Yes, she breathed. He kissed her softly at first, hardly daring to believe this was real. But when she melted against him and kissed him back with equal fervor, his restraint broke. He wrapped his arms around her and kissed her deeply, pouring all his pent-up emotion into it. She tasted like sunshine and hope, and he never wanted to let her go. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Willa laughed shakily. Well, she said, that was unexpected. Good unexpected or bad unexpected, very, very good unexpected. She smiled up at him, radiant. Though I suppose this complicates the employer-employee arrangement. Then I will find you a new job, Yates said immediately. I will hire someone else to work with the cattle. I will do whatever needs to be done to make this proper. Or, Willa said, her eyes sparkling with mischief and joy, you could marry me. Yates felt like his heart might burst from his chest. Are you proposing to me, Willa Morrison? I suppose I am. Unless you would prefer to do the proposing. Oh, I definitely want to do the proposing, he said. He took her hands in his, suddenly serious. Willa, I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other a short time, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I love your courage and your kindness and your intelligence. I love the way you brought peace to my cattle and to my life. Will you marry me? Yes, Willa said, tears streaming down her face now. Yes, yes, yes. He kissed her again, right there on the porch in the middle of the afternoon, not caring who might see. Inside the house, he heard Rosa's delighted exclamation and knew they had an audience, but he did not care about that either. All that mattered was the woman in his arms and the future that stretched out before them, bright with promise. The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the small church in Brownsville. It was a simple affair, befitting the times and their circumstances. Rosa and Miguel stood up with them, and several of the townsfolk attended, curious about the rancher who was marrying his mysterious cattle whisperer. Willa wore a dress that had been her mother's, which Rosa had altered to fit her. She looked beautiful beyond words, and when she walked down the aisle to Yates, his vision blurred with tears. The ceremony was brief, the words traditional, but when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Yates felt something fundamental shift in his world. He was no longer alone. He had a partner, a companion, someone to share his life with. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful. Rosa had prepared a feast, and the ranch hands all came to toast the newlyweds. Tommy played the fiddle, and there was dancing in the yard as the sun set. Yates held Willa close and swayed with her to the music, still half convinced he was dreaming. Happy, he murmured against her hair. Happier than I have ever been, she replied. When I walked onto your land that day 6 weeks ago, I was at the lowest point of my life. I had nothing. No family, no prospects, no hope. And now look at me. I have a husband I love, a home, a purpose. It is more than I ever dreamed possible. You gave me just as much, Yates told her. Maybe more. You gave me a reason to smile again. You made this place feel like home instead of just a ranch. You brought peace to everything, Willa, not just the cattle. Everything. They danced until the stars came out, and then Yates led his bride into the house and up to the bedroom they would now share. He had been nervous about this part, worried about doing things right, but Willa met him with such open love and trust that his anxiety faded. They came together sweetly, tenderly, two lonely souls finding comfort and joy in each other. Later, as Willa slept peacefully in his arms, Yates stared at the ceiling and marveled at how quickly life could change. 2 months ago, he had been resigned to a solitary existence, assuming he would die alone and unmourned. Now he had a wife, and the future seemed full of possibilities. He promised himself he would be worthy of the gift he had been given. He would cherish Willa every day for the rest of his life. The rustlers never returned, frightened off by the gunfight and the knowledge that the Double P Ranch would defend its property fiercely. The drought eventually broke in September with 3 days of steady rain that greened up the pastures and filled the water holes. The cattle thrived under Willa's continued care, growing sleek and healthy, but more than the cattle thrived. The ranch itself seemed to flourish with Willa's presence. She worked alongside Rosa in the kitchen, learning to make traditional Mexican dishes. She helped with the books, her neat handwriting and head for figures making the accounting much easier. She even learned to ride, though she never became as comfortable on horseback as she was on foot among the cattle. Yates found himself whistling while he worked, something he had not done since boyhood. He hurried through his chores so he could return to the house and see Willa's smile. They took long walks in the evenings, hand in hand, talking about everything and nothing. They made plans for the future, discussing how they might expand the ranch or perhaps start raising horses as well as cattle. "I would like to have children someday," Willa said one evening as they watched the sunset from their favorite spot on the porch. "If we are blessed with them." "So would I," Yates agreed. "Though I confess I know nothing about raising children. I was an only child and a fairly wild one at that." "We will learn together," Willa said, squeezing his hand, "the same way we learn everything else." As autumn gave way to winter, the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. The cattle remained calm and healthy, the work proceeded smoothly, and the household was peaceful and harmonious. Yates had never known such contentment. Every morning he woke up next to Willa was a gift. In December, Willa began feeling unwell in the mornings. Rosa took one look at her and immediately began preparing ginger tea and soda crackers, a knowing smile on her face. When Willa realized what her symptoms meant, she was overjoyed. "I am with child," she told Yates one evening, her eyes shining. "We are going to have a baby." Yates felt like every Christmas and birthday he had ever experienced had arrived at once. "Truly, you are sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor's confirmation, but Rosa says she has seen this 100 times and she is certain." Willa laughed. "We are going to be parents, Yates." He pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed with emotion. "I love you so much," he whispered. "Both of you." The pregnancy progressed normally through the winter and spring. Willa continued working with the cattle until she grew too large and uncomfortable, at which point Miguel gently insisted she stay at the house and let them handle the livestock. She protested but eventually agreed, spending her time instead preparing for the baby's arrival. Rosa taught her to sew baby clothes, and Yates built a cradle from mesquite wood, sanding it until it was smooth as glass. They transformed the small bedroom next to theirs into a nursery, painting the walls a cheerful yellow and filling it with handmade quilts and toys. On a warm June evening in 1879, nearly a year after Willa had first walked onto the Double P Ranch, their son was born. The labor was long and difficult, and Yates paced the floor downstairs, terrified and helpless, while Rosa and a midwife from town attended to Willa. When he finally heard the baby's cry, he nearly collapsed with relief. Rosa emerged from the bedroom, beaming. "You have a son, Yates. A healthy, strong boy, and Willa is tired but well. You can go in now." Yates climbed the stairs on shaking legs and entered the bedroom. Willa lay propped up on pillows, looking exhausted but radiantly happy with a small bundle in her arms. She looked up at him and smiled. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Yates approached and looked down at the tiny red face peeking out of the blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was making small, snuffling sounds. Yates felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "He is perfect," he breathed. "You are amazing. Thank you, Willa. Thank you for this incredible gift." "What should we name him?" Willa asked. They had discussed names for months but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son, Yates knew exactly what felt right. "James," he said. "After my father." "James Patterson." "James," Willa repeated, smiling. "I love it. Hello, James. Welcome to the world." Little James was a healthy, happy baby who rarely cried and seemed content to observe the world with solemn, dark eyes. The ranch hands all doted on him, taking turns holding him and making silly faces to earn his smiles. Rosa declared him the most beautiful child ever born and spoiled him shamelessly. But it was Yates who was most transformed by fatherhood. He had always been a serious, somewhat stern man, weathered by responsibility and loneliness. But with his son in his arms, he became someone new. He sang lullabies in a voice rough from disuse. He told silly stories. He played peek-a-boo and built towers of blocks for James to knock down. He discovered a capacity for joy and playfulness he had not known he possessed. Willa watched the two of them together and felt her heart overflow with love. This life they had built together, this family, was everything she had lost and never thought to find again. Every day she thanked whatever providence had led her to that pasture on that sweltering August day. One evening when James was about 6 months old, Willa returned to the northern pasture for the first time since his birth. Yates walked with her, carrying the baby. The cattle were grazing peacefully in the golden afternoon light, and when they saw Willa approaching, several of them ambled over to the fence. Diablo, the old bull, was among them. "Hello, my friends," Willa called out. "Did you miss me? I have been busy with this little one." She gestured to James, who stared at the cattle with wide eyes. Diablo snorted and pushed his massive head over the fence. Willa reached out to scratch his forehead, and the bull closed his eyes in contentment, just as he had that first day. "I think they did miss you," Yates observed. "They have been well behaved, but Miguel says they seem happier when they hear your voice." "Animals remember kindness," Willa said. "Just like people do. You showed me kindness when I desperately needed it, Yates, and I will never forget that." "You showed me kindness too," he replied. "You brought peace to my life, to everything. The cattle, the ranch, my own heart. You healed things I did not even know were broken." They stood together by the fence with their son between them and the cattle peacefully grazing beyond, and Yates felt a profound sense of completeness. This was what happiness looked like. This was what he had been searching for without knowing it all those lonely years. As James grew into a toddler, he developed his mother's gift with animals. He would toddle out to the pasture holding Willa's hand and laugh with delight at the cattle. He had no fear of them, and they seemed to sense his innocence and gentleness. The ranch hands joked that he would be an even better cattle whisperer than his mother. When James was 2 years old, Willa discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their second child, a daughter they named Margaret after Willa's mother, was born in the spring of 1882. She had Willa's honey-colored eyes and Yates's stubborn chin, and she ruled the household from her first breath. The ranch continued to prosper. Word had spread about the double Pt's remarkably calm cattle, and Yates found himself able to command higher prices when he sold his beef. Buyers knew that cattle from the double P were well handled and less likely to be stressed, which meant better meat. The extra income allowed Yates to expand the ranch, purchase better breeding stock, and build a larger house to accommodate their growing family. Through it all, Willa maintained her practice of spending time with the cattle. It was less about necessity now and more about her own pleasure. She loved being among the animals, reading to them or simply talking. It brought her peace, and that peace radiated outward to everyone around her. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Yates took Willa back to the exact spot where he had first seen her, standing among the cattle with her book. It was early morning, and the sun was just beginning to paint the sky with color. The cattle were stirring, and a few approached when they saw Willa. "You ever regret it?" Yates asked. "The way things happened. You did not exactly have a conventional courtship or engagement." Willa laughed and leaned against his shoulder. "Regret? Not for a single moment. I got to skip all the awkward social dancing and find my way straight to the man I was meant to be with. How many women can say that? Not many, I suspect." He wrapped his arm around her. "I want you to know that you saved my life, Willa. I was just existing before you came, going through the motions. You taught me how to live again." "We saved each other," Willa corrected. "I was lost and starving and terrified, and you gave me shelter and hope. And then we built something beautiful together." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sunrise. James was at the house with Rosa, probably helping her make breakfast and getting underfoot in the way only a 5-year-old could. Margaret was still sleeping, but she would wake soon, demanding attention and milk. It was a full, busy, sometimes chaotic life, but it was theirs and it was good. "Read to them," Yates said suddenly. "Like you did that first day. I want to hear it again." Willa pulled out the worn book of Emerson essays that she still carried with her everywhere. She opened it to a familiar page and began to read, her voice carrying across the pasture just as it had that sweltering August morning years ago. "In the woods, we return to reason and faith. There I feel that nothing can befall me in life, no disgrace, no calamity which nature cannot repair. Standing on the bare ground, my head bathed by the blithe air and uplifted into infinite space, all mean egotism vanishes." The cattle quieted, listening to her voice. A soft breeze stirred the grass, and Yates looked at his wife, the woman who had wandered onto his land reading to his cattle and had ended up giving him everything he had ever wanted, and felt gratitude so profound it brought tears to his eyes. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing of seasons and the growth of their children. James grew tall and strong, inheriting his father's ranching skills and his mother's gentle way with animals. Margaret proved to be a bright, willful child who kept everyone on their toes. In 1885, Willa gave birth to another son, whom they named Thomas. And 2 years after that, another daughter, Clara, completed their family. The Double P Ranch became known throughout southern Texas not just for its quality cattle but for its unique methods. Other ranchers would visit, curious about the woman who read to livestock, and Willa would patiently explain her father's teachings about calm voices and patient handling. Some adopted similar practices with success. Others dismissed it as nonsense, but could not argue with the results. Through it all, Yates and Willa's love deepened and matured. The passion of their early days settled into something richer and more sustaining. They were partners in every sense, working together to manage the ranch, raise their children, and build a legacy. They had disagreements, as all couples do, but they faced them together with honesty and respect. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates took Willa into Brownsville for a proper celebration. They left the children with Rosa and Miguel and spent the night at the best hotel in town. Over dinner, Yates presented her with a gift, a new leather-bound journal. "For your thoughts," he said, "and maybe someday for stories about your unusual life." Willa ran her fingers over the smooth leather, touched. "You think my life is story-worthy? I think the woman who walked 100 miles, tamed a herd of cattle with her voice, and captured the heart of a lonely rancher is absolutely story-worthy. Our children will want to know these stories someday. Their children too. Then I will write them," Willa promised. "Every detail, so they know how it really was." She kept that promise. Over the years, she filled that journal and several others with the story of their life together. She wrote about the day they met, about learning the ranch, about falling in love. She wrote about the birth of each child, about the challenges they faced and overcame. She wrote about the quiet moments that made up a life: morning coffee on the porch, bedtime stories, holding Yates's hand during a thunderstorm. As their children grew, they proved to be a blend of both parents' best qualities. James took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing a natural talent for the work. Margaret, contrary and brilliant, announced at 16 that she wanted to be a teacher and eventually opened a school in Brownsville. Thomas inherited his mother's love of books and his father's business sense, managing the ranch's finances with skill. And Clara, the baby, turned out to have the strongest connection to animals of all of them, working alongside her mother with the cattle and eventually starting her own horse breeding operation. Yates and Willa aged together, their hair turning gray, their hands weathered by work and time. But their love never wavered. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, tested and proven by life's inevitable trials and joys. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children organized a celebration at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around. The house overflowed with food and laughter. There was music and dancing, and at sunset, everyone gathered to toast the couple. Miguel, now in his 60s but still strong, stood to speak. 25 years ago, the boss hired a woman to read to his cattle. We all thought he had lost his mind. Laughter rippled through the crowd. But that woman brought peace to more than just the livestock. She brought peace to this entire ranch. She made it a home. And watching these two together all these years has reminded me what real love looks like. To Yates and Willa. To Yates and Willa. The crowd echoed, raising their glasses. Yates looked at his wife, at the woman who had changed his entire world, and felt the same surge of love and gratitude he had felt on their wedding day. Her hair was gray now, and there were lines around her eyes, but to him, she was as beautiful as the day he had first seen her standing in his pasture. "I love you," he said simply, for perhaps the 1,000th time, and yet it still felt insufficient to express the depth of his feeling. "I love you too," Willa replied, her eyes shining with happy tears. "Today and always." They danced together as the sun set over the land they had built their life on, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, their friends and community. The cattle lowed peacefully in the distance, and a cool breeze carried the scent of mesquite and sage. It was a perfect moment, the culmination of 25 years of love and partnership. But it was not the end. Not yet. Yates and Willa had many more years together ahead of them. They watched their children marry and have children of their own. They saw the ranch continue to prosper and grow. They weathered droughts and hard winters, economic downturns and personal losses. Through it all, they faced everything side by side, just as they had promised. As they entered their 60s, Yates began to slow down. His joints ached in the mornings and he tired more easily. He turned over most of the ranch operations to James, though he still went out every day to check on things and offer advice. Willa, meanwhile, continued her work with the cattle, though she did less of the physical work and more supervising as Clara took over the hands-on care. They spent more time simply enjoying each other's company. Long talks on the porch, reading together in the evening, taking slow walks around the property, reminiscing about the early days. They had built a good life, and they savored every moment of it. One evening, as they sat watching yet another spectacular Texas sunset, Willa rested her head on Yates's shoulder. "You remember the day we met?" she asked. "When I was standing in that pasture reading Emerson to your cattle, how could I forget? It was the day my life truly began. I was so frightened that day, so alone. I thought I had reached the end of everything, and instead it was the beginning." "You were the bravest person I had ever seen," Yates said. "Walking all that way, facing down a rattlesnake, standing up to those rustlers. You have always been brave, Willa. Only because you made me feel safe enough to be brave. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Yates corrected gently, echoing her words from so many years ago. "That is what love is, giving each other everything and building something beautiful together." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, their shouts and laughter carrying on the evening breeze. The cattle were bedding down for the night, peaceful and content. The ranch that had once been a lonely outpost was now a thriving family compound, full of life and love. "No regrets?" Yates asked. "Not a single one," Willa replied. "You? Only that I did not meet you sooner. I wish we had more time. We have had 30 wonderful years. That is more than many people get, and we will have more years yet. I am not going anywhere, Yates Patterson." He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "Good, because I cannot imagine this world without you in it." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Yates reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. A chance encounter in a cattle pasture. A woman's voice bringing peace to agitated animals. A lonely rancher's heart opening to love. It seemed like something from a story, too perfect to be real. But it was real. It was his life, and it had been better than anything he could have imagined. The years continued their steady march forward. Yates and Willa celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 35th. Their children all established successful lives of their own. Their grandchildren grew, and some of them began having children, making Yates and Willa great-grandparents. The ranch passed fully into James's capable hands, though Yates still offered counsel when asked. Willa continued to visit the cattle every day, even as she moved more slowly and needed a cane to navigate the uneven ground. The current herd had never known a time without her gentle presence, and they responded to her voice just as their ancestors had. It was a legacy that would continue long after she was gone, as Clara had taken up the practice and was teaching it to her own children. One warm spring morning in 1914, 36 years after their first meeting, Yates woke to find Willa already up and dressed. She was standing by the window, looking out over the ranch lands that had become so dear to them both. "Come back to bed," he grumbled, still half asleep. "It is early yet." "I want to go see the cattle," Willa said. "Will you come with me? Like we used to do?" Something in her voice made Yates get up despite his aching joints. He dressed slowly, and together they walked out to the northern pasture where they had first met all those years ago. The sun was just rising, painting the world in shades of gold and pink. The cattle saw them coming and ambled over, greeting Willa with soft lows and nuzzles. She stroked their broad faces and murmured to them, and Yates marveled anew at the gift she had. Even now, at 63 years old, she could calm and soothe with just her voice. "Read to them," Yates said, just as he had so many times before. "Please." Willa pulled out her father's book, now held together with careful repairs and love. She opened it to the same essay she had been reading that first day and began. "In the woods, we return to reason and faith. There I feel that nothing can befall me in life, no disgrace, no calamity which nature cannot repair." Her voice was older now, not quite as strong as it had been, but it still carried that same melodious quality that had first captivated him. The cattle quieted, listening. The breeze gentled, and Yates felt peace settle over everything, just as it always did when Willa spoke. When she finished, she closed the book and looked at him with eyes that still sparkled with intelligence and warmth despite their years. "Thank you," she said softly, "for giving me this life, for loving me, for building this family with me. Thank you for everything, Yates." "Thank you," he replied, his voice rough with emotion, "for saving me, for bringing peace to my cattle and my heart, for every single day we have had together." They stood together in the rising sun, holding hands as they had held hands 1,000 times before. Their children would arrive soon for Sunday dinner. Their grandchildren would fill the house with noise and chaos. Life would continue its beautiful, complicated dance. But for this moment, it was just the two of them and the cattle and the land they loved, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. Years continued to pass, and inevitably, time took its toll. Yates developed a heart condition that slowed him down considerably. Willa's eyesight began to fail, making reading more difficult, but they adapted as they had always adapted. Willa read to Yates in the evenings, holding the book close to her face and squinting at the words. Yates would sit in his chair and listen, transported by her voice to faraway places and times. Their love remained the constant in a changing world. The ranch evolved with new methods and technologies. Their children and grandchildren faced challenges and triumphs of their own. But Yates and Willa remained at the heart of it all, the foundation upon which everything else was built. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their family gathered for a celebration that rivaled their 25th. 4 generations of Pattersons filled the house and spilled out into the yard. There were toasts and speeches, stories and laughter. Everyone wanted to honor the couple whose love story had become family legend. Clara, now a successful rancher in her own right, stood to speak. "My parents' story could have been tragic. My mother was alone and desperate. My father was lonely and resigned to solitude. But instead, it became a love story that has inspired all of us. They showed us what it means to build a life together, to face challenges as a team, to love through the easy times and the hard times. They showed us that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from the most unexpected beginnings. A woman reading to cattle, a rancher brave enough to take a chance, and 40 years of love that has touched every single person in this family. Mother, Father, thank you for showing us how it is done." There was not a dry eye in the room. Yates stood, his movements slow but his spirit strong, and pulled Willa to her feet beside him. "Our story is not special," he said, his voice carrying despite its wavering quality. "It is simply 2 people choosing each other every single day for 40 years. That is what love is. Not the grand gestures or the perfect moments, though we have had our share of those. Love is the daily choice to be kind, to be patient, to be present. Willa chose me every day and I chose her, and that is how we built this life." "Hear, hear," Miguel's son, who had taken over as foreman when his father retired, raised his glass. "To daily choosing love." The party continued late into the evening, but eventually, Yates and Willa retreated to the quiet of their bedroom. They lay together in the bed they had shared for 40 years, hands clasped, hearts still beating in rhythm. 40 years, Willa marveled. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I would do it all again, Yates said. Every single moment, would you? Without hesitation. They fell asleep like that, holding hands, two people who had found each other against all odds and had built something beautiful and lasting. Yates passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later at the age of 76. His heart, which had grown weak with age, simply stopped beating one quiet night. Willa was beside him when he went, and she held his hand and told him she loved him one last time. The funeral was held at the ranch, with what seemed like half of southern Texas in attendance. Yates Patterson had been a respected rancher, a good neighbor, and a loving father and grandfather. But more than that, he had been a man who had shown by example what it meant to love well. Willa grieved deeply for the loss of her partner, but she did not let sorrow consume her. She had 42 years of beautiful memories to sustain her, and she had a family that loved her fiercely. She continued to live at the ranch, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and she continued to visit the cattle every day, though she needed help walking out to the pasture now. 2 years after Yates's death, on a warm August morning very much like the one when she had first arrived at the Double P, Willa asked Clara to help her out to the northern pasture one more time. "Are you sure, Mama?" Clara asked, worried. Her mother had been feeling weak lately, and the walk was not an easy one. "I am sure. I want to see them one more time, to read to them." Clara helped her mother walk slowly out to the fence where the cattle were grazing. They recognized Willa immediately and came over, these descendants of the animals she had first soothed all those years ago. She reached out to stroke their faces, and Clara saw tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Mama, are you all right?" "I am fine, sweetheart. I am just remembering. Your father found me here, right here in this spot. I was reading to the cattle and he came over that hill and my whole life changed." She smiled through her tears. "We had such a good life together, such a beautiful life." "You did," Clara agreed, her own eyes filling. "And you gave that life to all of us. We are who we are because of the love you and Papa showed us." Willa pulled out her father's book, now so fragile it barely held together. "Read it for me, sweetheart. My eyes are too weak now. Read the passage about the woods." Clara took the precious book carefully and opened it to the familiar page. In a voice very much like her mother's, clear and melodious, she began to read. "In the woods, we return to reason and faith. There I feel that nothing can befall me in life, no disgrace, no calamity which nature cannot repair. Standing on the bare ground, my head bathed by the blithe air and uplifted into infinite space, all mean egotism vanishes." As she read, the cattle quieted and listened, just as they always had. A soft breeze stirred the grass. The sun climbed higher in the perfect blue sky, and Willa closed her eyes, feeling peace settle over everything one last time. Willa Morrison Patterson passed away peacefully that evening, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She was 67 years old and had lived a life full of love and purpose. She was buried next to Yates on a hillside overlooking the ranch, and her gravestone bore a simple inscription: "She brought peace to everything." The ranch continued to thrive under James's management and eventually passed to his children. Clara's descendants continued the tradition of reading to the cattle, and the practice became one of the things that set the Double P apart. Visitors would come from far and wide to see the ranch where cattle responded to voices reading Emerson and Shakespeare and the Bible. The journals Willa had kept, documenting her life with Yates and the growth of their family, became treasured family heirlooms. Her great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren would read them and marvel at the love story that had started it all. A woman desperate and alone, reading to cattle to calm them. A lonely rancher who recognized something special when he saw it. and 42 years of love that had created a legacy spanning generations. Decades later, when the Patterson family celebrated the 150th anniversary of the ranch's founding, they held the celebration in the northern pasture where Yates and Willa had first met. Someone read from Willa's journals, sharing her words about that fateful day. Someone else read from her father's book of Emerson essays, the very passage she had been reading when Yates first saw her. And as those words drifted across the pasture, carried by the warm Texas breeze, the cattle quieted and listened, just as they had always done, just as they always would. Because some things transcended time and generations. Some traditions were worth keeping. And some love stories were so beautiful, so profound, that they echoed forward through the years, inspiring everyone who heard them to choose love, to choose kindness, to choose each other, day after day after day. The sun set over the ranch, painting the sky in glorious shades of gold and pink and purple. The cattle bedded down for the night, peaceful and content. And somewhere, beyond the veil of time and mortality, two souls who had found each other in the most unexpected way continued their journey together, bound by a love that death itself could not diminish. Their story was complete, their legacy assured, their love eternal. And the peace they had brought to everything continued to ripple outward, touching lives they would never know, in times they would never see, but which bore the indelible mark of their extraordinary, beautiful, perfectly ordinary love.